Nuclear war isn't just a nightmare, it's the one fear that has haunted entire generations. Long before big-budget blockbusters, filmmakers dared to ask the unthinkable: what if the world really ended in fire and silence? These weren't safe disaster flicks. They were warnings, provocations, and sometimes visions too real for comfort. So, how did the silver screen turn mushroom clouds into our darkest dreams? Let's dive into the films that shook audiences to their core. Failsafe, 1964. Imagine this: a glitch in the system, a single electronic hiccup, and suddenly the United States has bombers on their way to Moscow. No masterminds pulling strings, no sabotage, just technology doing what it was programmed to do while humans scramble to stop it. That's the tension of Sidney Lumet's Failsafe, a movie that refuses to soften how fragile the world really is when one button can decide the future of millions. Henry Fonda delivers a chilling performance as the U.S. president, caught in the worst scenario imaginable. Walter Matthau plays a strategist whose grim philosophy feels uncomfortably believable. The brilliance of Failsafe lies in its stripped-down style. Shot almost like a documentary, the suspense builds without flashy explosions. Every minute feels like a countdown clock. Every conversation, a desperate attempt to outthink a system spiraling out of control. The Pentagon wasn't thrilled with how real it felt, especially in an era when Americans were told their defense system was flawless. Audiences, however, saw something different. They saw the possibility that one small error could snowball into total devastation. No monsters, no sci-fi gimmicks, just humans trapped inside a system too big to manage. By the time the final twist arrives, you're left in silence. Failsafe doesn't end with relief. It ends with the sobering reminder that even the best intentions can't always stop disaster, and that's why it remains unforgettable. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1964. Only Stanley Kubrick could make the end of the world funny, strangely, uncomfortably funny. Dr. Strangelove took the same nightmare scenario as Failsafe, then twisted it into a pitch-black comedy that left audiences laughing nervously in their seats. Released just months apart, the two films feel like distorted mirrors of each other. One straight-faced, the other absurd, yet frighteningly close to reality. The plot: a rogue U.S. general sets a nuclear strike in motion, convinced it's the only way to protect America. What follows is a chain reaction of blunders, egos, and bureaucratic mishaps that spiral toward catastrophe. Peter Sellers steals the show in three roles: the nervous officer, the bumbling president, and the eccentric ex-scientist with a mind of his own. George C. Scott brings manic energy as a general who treats global destruction like a game. What made Strangelove terrifying wasn't just the jokes, it was the accuracy beneath them. Military insiders admitted many of the scenarios could actually happen. The so-called doomsday machine, a weapon that would automatically retaliate, wasn't pure invention. It was inspired by real Cold War ideas. Kubrick's genius was to show that the people with their hands on the world's future weren't superhuman. They were flawed, emotional, and sometimes ridiculous. The film's closing montage, set to the haunting tune of "We'll Meet Again," became one of cinema's most ironic endings. Cheerful music over mushroom clouds. Could there be a sharper summary of the nuclear age? Audiences walked out shaken, not because they didn't laugh, but because they realized how thin the line was between comedy and catastrophe. Threads, 1984. If the Day After left Americans shaken, Britain responded with something even more intense. Threads. Forget any notion of hope or rebuilding. This film doesn't just show nuclear war, it drags you through the aftermath in agonizing detail, leaving no space for comfort. It follows two families in Sheffield, an ordinary English city, as global tensions between the US and the Soviet Union finally spill over. When the bombs fall, the nightmare truly begins. Director Mick Jackson wanted realism, and realism is what he delivered. The film spares nothing: crumbling infrastructure, food shortages, and entire communities struggling to survive. And then the long-term effects: illness, famine, and children born into a broken world. Unlike Hollywood's dramatized disasters, Threads feels disturbingly authentic. Watching it is like sitting through a grim documentary of a future that could have happened. The BBC aired it once, and that was enough to leave a mark on a generation. Viewers reported sleepless nights, teachers described classrooms falling into silence, and psychologists noted its impact on young audiences. Even decades later, Threads hasn't softened. Critics regularly call it the bleakest film ever made, and for good reason, it refuses to let you escape. What makes Threads devastating isn't just the destruction, it's the inevitability. There's no hero, no miracle, no sense that survival equals triumph. Instead, it's a reminder that nuclear war wouldn't just erase cities, it would dismantle everyday life. To this day, people who saw it as teenagers say they've never forgotten a single frame. Threads is not just a movie, it's a warning etched into history. The day after 1983. Few television events rattled America like ABC's broadcast of the day after. This wasn't a blockbuster in theaters, it was free to watch, which meant nearly 100 million Americans tuned in to see what nuclear war might look like in their own backyards. For many, it was the first time they realized how fragile their world really was. Set in Lawrence, Kansas, the film follows everyday people, farmers, students, doctors, living ordinary lives until the unthinkable happens. The bombs fall, the skies darken, and suddenly, nuclear winter becomes reality. Unlike most disaster movies, The Day After spends little time on explosions. The true fear is in what follows: shortages, illnesses, and families separated. President Ronald Reagan himself admitted the movie unsettled him so deeply that it influenced his approach to nuclear arms negotiations. If a film can leave the leader of the free world shaken, imagine what it did to the public. Hospitals reported an increase in stress-related cases. Parents struggled to comfort children who had watched. Schools even held discussions the next morning to help students process what they had seen. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon disliked it. Declassified documents show they pressured the filmmakers to change the script, insisting that the Soviets should clearly be blamed. Director Nicholas Meyer refused, keeping the story about escalation through mistakes and miscommunication. That refusal gave the film its haunting power. The Day After wasn't entertainment. It was a collective national reckoning. And that's why, 40 years later, it's still remembered not just as a movie, but as an event that made America stare into the abyss. Testament, 1983. While most nuclear war films leaned on spectacle, Testament took the opposite path and somehow made the apocalypse even more terrifying. There are no mushroom clouds here, no massive battle scenes, no generals shouting orders. Instead, it's the story of one family in a small California town, slowly unraveling after an unseen nuclear exchange. That quiet, almost gentle approach is what makes it unforgettable. The plot centers on Carol, a mother trying to hold her household together as society collapses around her. The bombs fall off-screen, leaving only rumors and the eerie silence of a disconnected world. Slowly, the effects creep in: power outages, shortages, illnesses, neighbors all leaving town. There's no single moment of destruction, just a steady erosion of everything people take for granted. Director Lynn Littman based much of the script on real survivor accounts, which is why the details feel so authentic. Roger Ebert gave the film 4 stars, admitting it made him cry twice. Kevin Costner, in one of his early roles, later said he never forgot working on the project. Paramount was so moved by the made-for-TV cut that they released it in theaters, recognizing its quiet power. What makes Testament haunting is how personal it feels. Instead of nations or armies, it focuses on a mother reading bedtime stories to her children while the world outside disappears. That intimacy hits harder than any special effect ever could. In the end, Testament doesn't show us the bomb, it shows us the people left behind. And that, ironically, makes it one of the most powerful depictions of nuclear war ever filmed, When the Wind Blows, 1986. At first glance, When the Wind Blows looks almost innocent, an animated story with soft, watercolor visuals that feel more like a bedtime story than a cautionary tale. But don't let the gentle style fool you. This is one of the most devastating depictions of nuclear war ever put on screen, precisely because it hides its sadness beneath an almost childlike surface. The film follows Jim and Hilda, an elderly couple living in the English countryside. When news arrives that a strike is imminent, they prepare by following outdated pamphlets and relying on routines that have no power against fallout. They build a makeshift shelter, boil tea, and reassure each other that everything will soon return to normal. The audience knows, of course, that nothing will. What follows is heartbreaking. After the bomb drops, the couple tries to carry on with daily rituals, clinging to optimism as the world around them fades. Their strength declines, their surroundings decay, but their conversations remain filled with quiet hope that help will come or that life will somehow repair itself. The contrast between their innocence and the grim reality is almost unbearable. Director Jimmy Murakami doesn't flinch from showing the decline. The film becomes a meditation on misplaced trust, denial, and the quiet struggles of those least prepared to face catastrophe. The soundtrack, featuring contributions from David Bowie and Roger Waters, only deepens the melancholy. When the Wind Blows is proof that animation can be more emotionally devastating than live action. By the time the credits roll, you don't feel like you've just watched a cartoon. You feel like you've witnessed the fading of humanity itself. Special Bulletin, 1983. Before the day after rattled America, NBC unleashed something arguably even scarier, Special Bulletin. This wasn't framed like a movie at all. It played out as a fake live news broadcast, unfolding in real time as if viewers were watching an actual nuclear standoff. And for millions who tuned in, that line between fiction and reality blurred a little too well. The setup is simple. A group of individuals in Charleston, South Carolina, takes hostages aboard a tugboat, threatening to set off a homemade device unless their demands are met. The story is presented entirely through live coverage, complete with on-the-ground reporters, shaky feeds, anchor desk commentary, and urgent news bulletins. To anyone flipping channels that night, it could have easily looked real. Despite NBC flashing the word dramatization on screen, panic still broke out. Viewers called local stations, convinced they were watching an actual attack unfold. Charleston residents in particular reported genuine fear, believing their city was in danger. The uproar mirrored the famous Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, except this time the terror was nuclear, not Martian. The film went on to win multiple Emmys and is now remembered as one of the most effective pieces of nuclear-era television ever created. But its legacy lies in how uncomfortably it blurred truth and fiction. Unlike Hollywood spectacles, Special Bulletin forced viewers to confront how quickly news, fear, and confusion could combine into chaos. Looking back, it's more than just a TV movie. It's a reminder that in an age of screens and headlines, sometimes the scariest weapon isn't the bomb itself, it's believing the nightmare is already happening. Panic in Year Zero, 1962. Step back into the early 1960s, and you'll find Panic in Year Zero, a scrappy, low-budget thriller that still packs a punch. Directed by and starring Ray Milland, the film opens with an American family heading out of Los Angeles for a camping trip. On the highway, they see flashes of light behind them. The city has just been hit. From there, survival becomes the only goal. What makes Panic in Year Zero? Fascinating isn't its effects or budget. They were modest at best, but its raw depiction of how quickly normal life can collapse. The once stable father figure shifts into a hardened protector, willing to do whatever it takes to keep his family safe. Neighbors turn untrustworthy, strangers become unpredictable, and even the closest bonds are tested when survival is on the line. The film taps into the fear that the true danger after a nuclear strike might not be radiation, it might be other people. With food, fuel, and resources suddenly scarce, trust evaporates and conflict takes over. Though clearly a product of its era, the story's themes feel startlingly modern, echoing in later post-apocalyptic tales like The Road and The Walking Dead. Critics at the time were divided, some dismissing it as cheap, others praising its honesty. Today, it stands as an overlooked gem of the genre, a reminder that even in black and white, the apocalypse doesn't need grand effects to feel terrifying. Sometimes all it takes is a father locking the car doors, realizing that the world outside has become something else entirely. Panic in Year Zero may lack polish, but it delivers something far more haunting. The uneasy truth that when everything falls apart, survival often challenges the very humanity we're trying to protect. On the Beach, 1959. Long before the nuclear panic of the 1980s, there was On the Beach, a haunting classic that showed audiences what the end of the world might really look like, not with fire and explosions, but with silence and waiting. Set in Australia after a global nuclear exchange, the story imagines a final safe corner of the Earth, slowly awaiting the inevitable spread of fallout. Gregory Peck plays a stoic submarine captain, Ava Gardner brings depth as a woman clinging to hope, and Fred Astaire, in a rare dramatic role, portrays a weary scientist. Together, they give the film an air of elegance and tragedy. There are no bombs falling on screen, no cities burning. Instead, the suspense comes from knowing the clock is ticking, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it. Director Stanley Kramer leans heavily on mood, the quiet beaches, the still, towns, the characters pretending life can go on. All of it builds a strange calm that makes the story even more devastating. The most chilling moment may be the sight of an empty street with a banner that reads, "There is still time, brother." When it premiered, On the Beach sparked debates around the world. Even President Eisenhower reportedly screened it, and it added urgency to nuclear policy discussions. Audiences left theaters shaken, not by spectacle, but by the weight of inevitability. What makes On the Beach unforgettable is its restraint. By avoiding explosions and effects, it forces you to confront the truth that nuclear war wouldn't just destroy, it would linger quietly until there was nothing left. Miracle Mile, 1988. Most apocalyptic films start with destruction. Miracle Mile begins with a love story. Anthony Edwards plays Harry, a man who meets Julie and falls instantly in love. It's sweet, it's light, and it feels like the start of a romantic comedy. Then, in one phone call, everything flips. Harry answers a ringing payphone and hears a soldier's voice warning that nuclear missiles are on the way. Suddenly, the world tilts off its axis. From that moment, the film unfolds almost in real time, following Harry's desperate attempt to find Julie before the bombs fall. Along the way, Los Angeles descends into chaos, riots, panic, and confusion, spreading like wildfire as rumors race through the city. Director Steve DeJarnette captures the mayhem with handheld immediacy, making viewers feel like they're running through the streets alongside the characters. What sets Miracle Mile apart is its blend of tenderness and terror. You're invested in Harry and Julie's story, but the film never lets you forget that time is running out. Every conversation, every obstacle, every wrong turn feels like a ticking clock. Studios pressured DeJarnette to change the ending, to give audiences a glimmer of hope. He refused, holding firm to his vision. Anthony Edwards himself admitted the story unsettled him, saying he couldn't believe someone had written something so uncompromising. Miracle Mile didn't make huge money at the box office, but over time it became a cult favorite, celebrated for daring to show love and doom colliding in the same heartbeat. It's proof that sometimes the scariest apocalyptic stories aren't about governments or generals. They're about ordinary people trying to hold on to each other as the world falls apart. The War Game, 1966. Not all films about nuclear war were shown to the public. The BBC's The War Game was considered so disturbing that it was shelved for nearly 20 years before finally airing. Shot in a stark documentary style, the 47-minute film presents a fictional account of what would happen if nuclear conflict reached Britain. The results are chilling precisely because they look so real. Set in the town of Rochester, the story unfolds with handheld cameras, news-style narration, and minimal effects. Instead of Hollywood drama, it offers matter-of-fact depictions, people struggling in shelters, food and water running out, and communities breaking under stress. It feels less like a movie and more like historical footage from a future that mercifully never happened. Director Peter Watkins drew on eyewitness accounts from Hiroshima and World War II bombings, blending them into his fictional narrative. The effect was powerful enough that the BBC decided airing it might traumatize the public. Instead, it circulated quietly among academics and defense experts until finally reaching TV screens in 1985. What makes the war game stand out is its unflinching honesty. There are no heroes, no grand speeches, no suggestion of triumph. Just ordinary people facing the unimaginable with limited resources and no real hope of rescue. When it did eventually air, it immediately earned praise as one of the most convincing depictions of nuclear devastation ever made. To this day, the war game remains proof that sometimes the simplest approach, filming it as if it were news, can hit harder than any special effects budget. The Divide, 2011. While most of the films on this list come from the Cold War era, The Divide brought the nightmare into the 21st century with a claustrophobic, modern edge. The story begins with a nuclear blast hitting New York City, sending a group of survivors scrambling into the basement of their apartment building. What starts as relief quickly turns into tension as the group realizes they may be trapped together for far longer than expected. The film leans heavily into atmosphere. The cramped, dimly lit shelter becomes a pressure cooker, and as time drags on, tempers flare. What begins as uneasy cooperation slowly unravels into mistrust and conflict. Unlike other entries on this list, The Divide doesn't focus much on the world outside. It's about the breakdown inside and how stress can twist even the closest bonds. Critics were divided. Some praised the intense setup, the claustrophobic tone, and the willingness to explore how fear changes people. Others felt it pushed too far into bleakness without offering enough balance. Still, its core idea struck a nerve. Sometimes the hardest part of surviving isn't the disaster itself, it's surviving with each other. The Divide may not have reached the same legendary status as Threads or The Day After, but it added a modern chapter to the genre. By showing how quickly trust erodes when supplies dwindle and space is scarce, it tapped into fears that are timeless. It's a reminder that nuclear war stories don't always need vast battlefields or sweeping special effects. Sometimes, the scariest stage is a locked basement where the biggest threat isn't outside, it's what people become when the pressure mounts. 12 films, 12 visions of the unthinkable. From grim realism to surreal satire, each one showed us not just how the world might end, but how people might face the moments leading up to it. They weren't just movies, they were warnings carved into cinema history. Which of these struck you the hardest? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe for more journeys into film's most haunting and unforgettable stories.